This is a video on an Edexcel topic 3 for B1 Biology about problem solving solutions to a changing environment. This is the last topic in B1 and I've already made the videos on C1 and P1, so you'll have a complete set for GCSE Science. After that I will start on the additional science videos. So this topic covers drugs such as alcohol and caffeine, so stimulants and depressants, and a few others as well, hallucinogenics and painkillers. Also covers after that the idea of disease and our defense against disease. Then we move on to a slightly different topic than energy and pyramids of biomass, and then ends with the recycling of nutrients. So let's start with drugs and reaction times. So a drug is a chemical substance such as a narcotic or hallucinogen which affects the central nervous system, causing changes in psychological behaviour or possible addiction. So a drug is something that causes a change in behaviour or addiction. That's the definition of a drug. So that has come up a couple of times in the past. Define a drug, and that's what you need to do. So painkillers decrease the feeling of pain by blocking nerve impulses. Hallucinogens, distort what is actually being seen and heard. Stimulants increase brain activity, increase the amount of neurotransmitters at some synapses, so that increases the speed of reactions. Stimulants can be used to treat depression, and depressants decrease brain activity, slow reactions, and therefore you've got poor judgment of speed and distances. So you can investigate a reaction time by dropping a ruler, and then the further up the ruler you catch it, the longer your reaction time is. Okay. So let's get into some of these drugs. First one I'll talk about is cigarettes. So the main chemicals are tar, carbon monoxide, and nicotine. Tar is a carcinogen. It's a chemical that causes cancer. That's one of my carcinogen. Carbon monoxide combines with hemoglobin, and that's an irreversible combination in red blood cells. This means that the blood carries less oxygen, so that could lead to death. In pregnant women, this could lead to babies being born underweight. Nicotine is an addictive substance and makes people smoke more. So nicotine is the bit that's addictive in cigarettes. Alcohol, there are some long-term effects of alcohol that we'll go through. So long-term and short-term effects of alcohol, we'll go through these one by one. So the short-term effects are that it slows your reactions because it's depressant. You can also get blurred vision and lower inhibitions. Long-term, alcohol is poisonous, so the liver can normally break down alcohol into non-poisonous products. Drinking too much can lead to the death of liver cells, and that causes scar tissue. That blocks the flow of blood around the liver, so it's all cirrhosis. Okay, please make sure you don't call it liver cancer. That is not the answer. It's cirrhosis. So make sure you memorize this and the spelling of it. This leads to dangerous substances building up within the body. Drinking too much alcohol can also lead to brain damage. They also like to link this to sort of the social ramifications. So you could say it could lead to like potentially increased crime rates. And also the cost of addiction, so that people need to pay for their alcoholism. This is where it links into organ transplants because some diseases can be cured, however there are some ethical issues. They cost a lot of money. Should we be spending this money on people that aren't trying to actually solve their problems? Maybe they are, maybe they need that second chance. So living people could donate their whole organs, such as a kidney or part of the liver. Organs from people who have recently died or people that are brain dead can also be transplanted. The main issue is a shortage of donors, and this is not just in the UK, this is worldwide. Consent of the family is required before some organs can be taken. Some people are unlikely to get an organ transplant if they are unlikely to survive the operation, and also if they haven't expressed willingness to change their lifestyle. So some people will not get a transplant if they haven't shown that they're willing to change, but also if there's not much chance of survival. So generally elderly people don't really get a transplant. Some people believe that people who have harmed their own organs don't deserve a transplant. They believe that transplant should be given to those most likely to benefit from them. Right, so moving on from drugs and the ethics behind drugs, let's get stuck into disease. So you might be asked to define a microorganism that causes an infectious disease, and that is a pathogen. So you could have a definition of what is a pathogen, a microorganism that causes an infectious disease. There are many methods by which these pathogens can spread, and you do need to know these all. I've recently gone through a test, and a lot of these came up on it. So cholera is an example of a pathogen that spreads through water. Salmonella is through food, it's food poisoning. Influenza or flu is through the air, coughing and sneezing. It spreads through the air. Athlete's foot is through contact, so that's through a contaminated substance. HIV and AIDS, that's bodily fluids. So it could be the bloods mixing, it could be needles mixing, it could be anything. The bodily fluids have to mix for that. Animal vectors, okay, that's generally mosquitoes carrying the protozoan that causes malaria, or the housefly carrying the bacteria that causes dysentery and potentially severe diarrhea. So know how each of these pathogens is spread. Give an example of how each can spread. So give an example of something that can go through water, food, and if you're making your own notes, make sure you tie those together. There's two main types of barriers that the body has to prevent pathogens actually entering the body. And these two are sort of chemical and physical barriers. Physical barriers are the skin and the respiratory system. So the skin seals itself, okay, blood clots essentially, and stops things getting through. The respiratory system has cilia and mucus that prevent pathogens getting in. Mucus catches dust and bacteria as they enter, and the cilia sweeps them away from the lungs. But we've also got chemical barriers. There's two main ones of these. The first one, the most obvious one, is in the stomach. There's hydrochloric acid in the stomach, and it kills any pathogens, any bacteria that get in entering the food. You also have lysozyme in your tears, and that kills any bacteria landing in your eye. So both of those are chemical barriers. Antiseptics and antibiotics. You need to know a bit about these two. Plants produce chemicals that have antibacterial effects. In other words, they kill bacteria. They have this to defend themselves from pathogens as well, and we can use these chemicals in medicine. Antiseptics are used outside of the body to stop disease spreading, so like antiseptic hand gel to clean your hands, or antiseptic wipes that can be used on the surface to kill bacteria on the surface. So they can be used to clean wounds, worktops and surfaces, and also hands. Okay, they're often found in kitchens and bathroom cleaners. They're used in hospitals to stop the spread of infections. For example, MRSA, and we'll speak about MRSA in a second. Antibiotics are used inside the body to treat infections. Okay, so they generally are fighting things inside the body. So once you're affected, you take a pill. The antibiotics don't destroy viruses. They can only treat patients infected with a bacteria or a fungus. Okay, and these two types of antibiotics are antibacterial antibiotics or antifungal antibiotics. So penicillin is antibacterial, and it's used to treat bacterial infections. So some bacteria have evolved to develop resistance to antibiotics. So we need to get onto that. Resistant bacteria and how that can come about. The story you need to know a bit about is MRSA. MRSA essentially is a bacteria that caused massive issues in the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, in the 2000s. What actually happened was the bacteria mutated to antibiotics, therefore antibiotics could no longer kill MRSA, so we had to use antiseptics to stop it coming about in the first place, getting anywhere near the surfaces. So what actually happened is the bacteria mutated and evolved to become resistant because it hadn't been killed off by antibiotic. So if you get infected with the resistant bacteria, you can't be killed by a specific antibiotic. The resistant bacteria reproduce, the population increases, because those that are surviving will continue to survive and pass on their genes. That's natural selection, that's evolution. Topic 1, if you want to go back and watch that video. So that resistant infection becomes more serious. So MRSA is a resistant strand of bacteria that did this. It became resistant to a really powerful antibiotic. And this could have happened because of the misuse of antibiotics, people over-prescribing them to patients, or patients not actually finishing their course and therefore killing off all bacteria. So MRSA has become resistant to antibiotics. So antibiotics are no longer really given out for mild infections, now only when we really have really serious infections through antibiotics. So you have a bunch of bacteria, including a resistant variety there, and the rest of them are normal. So all these blue ones are normal, and that red one there is resistant. All of the blue ones are wiped out. They're completely wiped out by the antibiotics. The red one survives though. The resistant bacteria multiply, okay, and the more common one die out, and eventually all you're left with is the resistant strain. Oops, that's my previous video. I don't want to view that one. Okay, so how can you actually investigate these? So to investigate antibiotics and antiseptics, you need to grow a culture of microorganisms in a petri dish. It's usually full of agar jelly. The bacteria are placed into sterile jelly, and the discs are soaked in different antibiotics and are placed onto the jelly. Usually disc is soaked in sort of sterile water to make sure it doesn't have any bacteria on it to begin with. So you've got a control experiment to compare it to. Discs are left in the jelly for 24 hours, and the bacteria multiply and cover the jelly. After 24 hours, the petri dish can be inspected, and you should find that anywhere where bacteria haven't grown, it's called an inhibition zone, and the larger the inhibition zone, the more effective the antibiotic or the antiseptic is. Okay, so this one's got a more, sorry, I just pointed with my finger, and you point with my mouse. Okay, so over here is a larger inhibition zone. That one is much more effective than this one over here. So the controls for this experiment are temperature, the size of the disc, and the concentration of the antibiotics. And also remember to compare to the water test. It should always have been more in the water test. Right, we're coming towards the end now, so we've got energy and biomass, we've got parasites and mutualism, we've got a little bit about eutrophication, I think that's over there, yep, and then recycling indicator species, carbon and nitrogen cycles. So, let's get stuck into energy and biomass. This is pretty straightforward. So, interdependence, if you ever see that phrase, is the relationship between living things. It's dynamic, so things are changing all the time. So we can represent these using food chains and food webs, pyramids of number and pyramids of biomass. The main thing you need to understand is pyramids of number and pyramids of biomass. The pyramid of biomass on the right shows a relationship between dandelions, rabbits, foxes and fleas. So it's different from pyramid of number because it takes into account the amount of mass and material, mass something has. So there'll be millions more dandelions than rabbits, but because each rabbit has more mass, the pyramid of biomass looks like this. Note that it gets smaller at each stage. Each level of pyramid biomass is called a trophic level. The bar at the bottom is always called the producer, and the second bar is always a primary consumer. Energy is lost at each stage of the food chain, and therefore energy is lost at each stage of the pyramid of biomass. That's why it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter, because energy is being lost at each stage. Not all of the energy passes on, so some of the energy is lost as organisms undergo life processes. Okay, so for example, when a rabbit has got its energy from eating dandelions, not all of the energy gets passed onto the fox, which eats a rabbit. Some is lost via respiration to allow the rabbit to actually move, but also via excretion, when it removes the waste products from the body. Remember, not all of the rabbit is going to be edible as well. Some of the energy is going into bones, which you can't get out of it. Large mammals, such as whales, lose a lot of energy as they have a large mass to move and a large surface area to keep warm, essentially. So they have a large surface area to keep constant temperature. Some of these organisms within food chains and food webs sort of look after each other. They have what's called a mutualistic relationship. And some of them are parasites, so it's like feeding off the other one. Let's make sure we understand what those two mean. Parasites take without giving. Okay, so they take, and they never give. They live on a host and they take what they need to survive, and they don't give anything back. That often harms that host. Okay, this is a win-lose situation. So you've got fleas. They live in fur of animals and sometimes humans, and they feed on sucking on the blood. It sounds disgusting, and they reproduce really, really quickly. Headlines do the same thing: live in human scalps, sucking for blood for food, making the person itch as well. Tapeworms, okay, attach to the intestinal wall, and they absorb nutrients, and that causes malnutrition for the host. And mistletoe, they grow on trees and shrubs, and they absorb all the water and nutrients from the host, and therefore the host growth can reduce. Occasionally dying, not often, but definitely taking away water and nutrients from them. Mutualistic relationships are mutual, so they're allowing both to benefit. Okay, so both to benefit. Mutualistic, both organisms benefit. It's a win-win. So you've got oxpeckers, you've got cleaner fish, you've got nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and you've got chemosynthetic bacteria as well. So oxpeckers are birds that pick on the back of a buffalo. They eat the pests off the buffalo and alert the animals to any predators nearby. The buffalo provides the oxpecker with a source of food, and the oxpecker is an example of a cleaner species. It comes along to clean. So cleaner fish eat the dead skin off, eat dead skin and parasites of larger fish, and in return they're provided with a source of food, and they're not eaten by the larger fish. So the larger fish kind of looks after his buddy, because his buddy is eating the dead skin and getting rid of any parasites. It's quite nice. And you've got nitrogen-fixing bacteria in legumes. Okay, so these are bacteria that get a constant supply of sugar from the legume. So the bacteria constantly getting sugar from the legume, and in return they provide the legume with the legume plant essentially with the essential nitrates it needs for growth, because nitrates need for growth. So they fix nitrates into the plant, into the legume, and in return they get sugar to keep them alive. There's also chemosynthetic bacteria in deep sea vents. So these live in giant tube worms or gills of mussels, and the bacteria are supplied with chemicals from seawater, and in return they produce the food for themselves and the host. So again, they're given what they need to survive, and in return say, here, have some food, I'll have some too, but you got some as well there. So they provide for everybody by doing that. That's a nice mutualistic relationship. So we need to talk a bit about human activity and recycling. The main bit of human activity that you need to understand that comes up so often here is eutrophication. So I'll go through that in a bit of detail in a second. The human population is rising drastically, okay, due to medical advances. This puts a strain on resources, there's not as much raw materials, because there's a greater demand for them. So modern farming has to keep up with these demands. And some potential problems are our resources are non-renewable and our raw materials are being used up. We're making more waste, more pollutants, specifically phosphates from detergents, nitrates from fertilizers, and sulfur dioxide from coal burning power stations. So fertilizers contain nitrates. Now this is where it gets dangerous, very dangerous. And they allow plants to grow rapidly, but they also increase the yield of crops. Fantastic. But if these nitrates flow into lakes, it can lead to eutrophication. So I've got a picture of it over here, and I'll go through it step by step. First, the nitrate washes into the water, causing rapid growth of algae on the top. Some plants die because of competition to light. They can't get enough light, so they die. So therefore, the microbes will start entering the water and feed on this dead material. The plants that die are the plants on the bottom of the seabed. They can't do photosynthesis anymore. You need to say the plants on the seabed. Plants at the top will still be fine. Plants on the seabed won't. The microbes use up all of the oxygen. So it's not the fact that there's no oxygen because the plants aren't producing it. It's the fact that the microbes have used up all of the oxygen to respire, and therefore the fish and other animals die. Raw sewage can also cause this process. If you pump raw sewage into a lake, it can also cause this to happen. So you can also do this with a practical and easiest way is by putting a piece of moist cotton wool in a jar with seedlings. The cotton wool needs to be moistened in pollutant, so different jars can have different amounts of pollutant, and you can compare the growth of each one. Recycling. So, pros and cons of recycling. Recycling means that natural resources last longer, we conserve them. If items weren't recycled, there'll be more waste, more landfill. More materials will also need to be manufactured and extracted. That's a large amount of energy and therefore a large amount of money. Recycling means that we make the best out of the limited materials that we have, and recycling paper means that fewer trees need to be cut down, preventing deforestation. Recycling paper also uses a lot less energy. Plastics are made from crude oil, so recycling helps to conserve our oil resources. Plastics decompose slowly, so they fill up landfill sites over a long lifetime, so recycling is the best bet. However, recycling still uses energy, and equipment can be expensive, the quality of recycled materials can sometimes be poor, and some materials can only be recycled a limited number of times. So moving on, we've got indicator species. So these are indicators of pollution. So each of these species allows us to see that pollution is actually taking place. Areas of high nitrate concentration contain a large proportion of the population of bacteria. Stonefly larvae, freshwater shrimps are good indicators of water pollution. They're only present in clean water. So stonefly and freshwater shrimps only in clean water. Some invertebrates only live in polluted conditions. So bloodworms and sludge worms live in polluted conditions. Lichens are indicators of air pollution. They're sensitive to sulfur dioxide concentrations. The larger the number of lichen, the cleaner the air is generally. Black spot fungus is found on rose leaves. Its presence indicates clean air. So if you have black spot fungus, it's clean air. Dissolved oxygen meters and chemical tests can also be seen to look for amounts of oxygen in the water. Electronic meters and lab tests can be used to sort of measure the concentration of sulfur dioxide in the air as well. So we've got two processes that are taking place here. By the way, if you're doing the foundation tier, you do not need to know nitrogen cycle. Only higher tier students need to know the nitrogen cycle. Right, it's pretty straightforward. There's stores of carbon on Earth. They're constantly being recycled. Okay, photosynthesis. During photosynthesis, plants remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's the main process by which how carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. Also, it's removed via sort of dissolving in oceans, but that doesn't happen as much as it used to. So carbon compounds then sort of pass along the chain via feeding, respiration puts carbon back into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide, decomposers release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere when they respire, fossil fuels release carbon dioxide when things are being burnt. So look through this diagram, make sure you know all the stores of carbon the boxes, and all the processes of moving carbon around, the lines. A similar process with nitrogen. You need to know the stores, the boxes, and the processes, the lines. Okay, so just like carbon, nitrogen is constantly being recycled. Nitrogen gas in the air cannot be directly taken in by plants and animals because it is so unreactive. It requires the plants and animals to create proteins for growth. So nitrogen fixing bacteria, we've already spoken about those, they live in the root nodules, so or the soil can fix nitrogen gas. The four main types of bacteria are decomposing bacteria, which decompose urea and turn it into ammonia, nitrifying, that turn ammonia into nitrates, nitrogen fixing, that turn nitrogen in the atmosphere into nitrogen compounds that the soil that can be used by plants, and denitrifying bacteria that turn these nitrates back into gas, but that has no benefit for living organisms. The other way is nitrogen fixed is by lightning, so lightning can convert nitrogen gas into nitrates, which then can be taken in by the soil. Plants absorb nitrates from the soil, just like I said, which they can use for growth. But also nitrogen compounds pass along a food chain or web when plants high in protein are eaten, so like legumes. So something that's high in protein, like beans, if you eat them, that gets passed along the food chain and you take them in like that. So remember, these nitrates are required for growth. Nitrates make proteins, proteins are required for growth. And that is the end of B1 Edexcel GCSE Chemistry, Topic 3. That's the end of B1, and good luck with your examination.